My company is donating $25,000 to this cause.
The room fell silent. Every eye turned to the woman in the emerald gown. The woman Galaℹ Whitaker had spent 3 years hiding from this very crowd. She stood at the microphone, poised under the crystal chandeliers of Atlanta's most exclusive charity gala, her voice steady and clear. My company is donating $25,000 to this cause. Thunderous applause erupted. Guests rose from their seats. Champagne glasses clinked in celebration, but Galaℹ sat frozen, his face drained of color, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was Ayanna, his wife, his secret, his shame, and she had just done the unthinkable. She had stepped into his world without permission, and now everyone knew. Let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so deeply, yet been too afraid to show them to the world? Have you ever hidden a part of yourself because you feared what others might think? What would you do if the person you loved most was also your biggest secret? For Galaℹ, that secret had a name, Ayanna Linwood. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of whispered "I love yous" behind closed doors. 3 years of holding her hand in the darkness of their bedroom while refusing to hold it in the light of day. Not a single colleague knew she existed. Not one friend had met her. 0 public appearances together, not at company dinners, not at holiday parties, not even at casual weekend brunches. Galaℹ had built an entire life with Ayanna in private, while pretending to be a bachelor in public. And tonight, at this luxury charity gala for affordable housing, the event, his real estate firm sponsored every year, everything was about to change. But Ayanna Linwood wasn't about to stay hidden any longer. What she did next didn't just shock the room, it shattered Galaℹ's world and forced him to face the truth he'd been running from. Welcome to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, where every story carries a lesson that could change your life. If you believe in stories that inspire transformation, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. This is a story about love and shame, about courage and redemption, about a woman who refused to be erased, and a man who finally learned what it means to stand proud beside the person he loves. And don't forget to hit the like button if you've ever struggled with shame or insecurity in a relationship. Trust me, you're not alone. Now, let me take you back to where this night began, just hours earlier, in downtown Atlanta. Galaℹ Whitaker's corner office sat on the 23rd floor of the Piedmont Tower, one of downtown Atlanta's most prestigious addresses. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city, the Georgia Aquarium to the left, Centennial, Olympic Park straight ahead, and the glittering downtown core spreading out in all directions. It was the kind of office that screamed success, the kind ambitious developers dreamed about for years before ever sitting behind such a desk. But tonight, as the city lights began to flicker on one by one, Galaℹ felt nothing but darkness. He sat alone, his expensive leather chair turned toward the window, his reflection staring back at him like an accusation. 34 years old, partner at Monarch Development Group, lead architect on 3 major affordable housing projects. His name appeared in the Atlanta Business Chronicle just last month, accompanied by a photo of him shaking hands with the mayor. On paper, Galaℹ Whitaker had everything. In reality, he was living a lie. He loosened his tie and rubbed his temples. The charity gala started in less than 2 hours. His tuxedo hung on the back of his office door, freshly pressed and ready. His boss, Richard Grant, had already texted twice, asking if Galaℹ would be riding with him and the senior partners. Galaℹ had declined both times, citing errands he needed to run first. The truth? He couldn't bear the thought of small talk in the back of a luxury sedan. Not tonight. Not when the weight of his secret pressed down on his chest like concrete. Because waiting at home, in the modest but beautiful townhouse they shared in Virginia Highland, was Ayanna. His wife, the woman he loved more than his own life, the woman he had never once introduced to his colleagues. Galaℹ's phone buzzed. A text from Ayanna, almost ready. "Should I meet you there or do you want to pick me up?" His stomach twisted. He typed back quickly, "I'll pick you up. Leaving soon." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. then appeared again. Finally, "Okay, I'll be waiting." He stared at those 4 words until his vision blurred. She always waited. She had been waiting for 3 years, waiting for him to be brave enough, proud enough, strong enough to show her to the world. And he had failed her every single time. Callum stood and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Down below, couples strolled hand in hand through the park. A man twirled his girlfriend under a street lamp, both of them laughing. So easy, so natural, so free. Why couldn't he be like that? He knew the answer, even if he hated admitting it. Fear, cowardice, the gnawing, relentless anxiety about what people might say, what they might think, how they might look at him differently once they knew. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Richard Grant. "Callum, remember to bring your A-game tonight. Senator Michaels will be there, and she's very interested in our new West Side project. Charm her." Callum exhaled slowly and texted back a thumbs-up emoji. Charm, performance, image. That's what tonight was really about, wasn't it? Playing the part of the successful, charismatic developer who had it all together. The man everyone wanted on their team, at their table, in their corner. But how could he charm anyone when he could barely look at himself? Across town, in the warm glow of their bedroom, Ayanna Linwood sat at her vanity, carefully applying mascara. Her hand was steady, her movements practiced and calm. She had done this routine 100 times before, getting ready for events. She would never attend, dressing up for nights she would spend alone. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't getting ready to stay home. She was getting ready to walk into Callum's world, whether he was ready for her or not. The deep green gown hung beside her, the fabric rich and luxurious. She had bought it 3 weeks ago, the moment Callum mentioned the charity gala. He hadn't invited her, of course. He never did. But this time, she hadn't waited for an invitation. "I'd like to go with you," she had told him over breakfast one Saturday morning. Callum had frozen mid-sip of coffee, his eyes widening slightly. "To the gala?" "Yes." "To the gala." Ayanna kept her voice light, unbothered. "It's for affordable housing, right? That's literally what my company works on. I should be there." He had stammered something about it being a boring event, mostly just donors and politicians making speeches. She had smiled and said she didn't mind boring. He had changed the subject. But he hadn't said no, and she had taken that as permission. Ayanna finished her makeup and stood, slipping out of her robe. The gown slid over her body like water, hugging her curves in all the right places. She turned to face the full-length mirror on the closet door. The woman staring back at her was stunning. Dark curls cascaded over her shoulders. Her warm brown skin glowed against the emerald fabric. Her eyes, deep and expressive, held both sadness and strength. She looked like she belonged at a luxury gala. She looked like someone worth being proud of. So why wasn't she enough? Ayanna touched the gold necklace at her throat, the one her mother had given her on her wedding day. "He loves you," her mother had whispered, while fastening the clasp. "I can see it in his eyes. Hold on to that." She had held on to it. Through 3 years of empty chairs at company dinners, through 3 years of being introduced as a friend on the rare occasions they were seen together in public, through 3 years of watching the man she loved walk out the door over and over again, leaving her behind. But love wasn't supposed to feel like hiding, was it? Ayanna picked up her phone and texted Callum. His response came quickly, as it always did. He would pick her up. He would take her to the gala. She wondered if he realized this was her line in the sand. Ayanna Linwood wasn't just a devoted wife. She was a successful entrepreneur in her own right. 5 years ago, she had founded Bloom Collective, a non-profit design firm that transformed neglected urban spaces into vibrant community art hubs. Abandoned lots became gardens. Empty storefronts became galleries. Forgotten neighborhoods found new life through color, creativity, and hope. Her work had been featured in Atlanta magazine. She had been a guest speaker at TEDx Atlanta. Last year, the city council had given her an award for community development. She employed 12 people, all local artists and designers who believed in her vision. But Callum's colleagues didn't know any of that. They didn't know she existed. Ayanna walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood. Streetlights cast golden pools on the sidewalk. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a car door slammed. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. She thought about the first time she had asked to attend one of Callum's work events. It was a casual office picnic, nothing fancy. She had been so excited, had worn her favorite sundress, had brought homemade lemonade to share. When she arrived, Callum's face had gone pale. His boss had smiled and asked, "Who's this? Your sister?" And Callum, the man who whispered "I love you" every morning, had said, "Just a childhood friend. Just a friend." Ayanna had smiled through the humiliation, had stayed for exactly 30 minutes, then quietly left. She had cried the entire drive home. That night, Callum had apologized profusely. He had held her, had kissed her tears, had promised he would do better. She had forgiven him because she loved him, because she believed people could change. But here they were, 3 years later, and nothing had changed. Except her. Ayanna checked her reflection one last time. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and smiled. Not the sad, resigned smile she had worn for so long, but something fiercer. Something that said, "I am done waiting for you to be ready." Tonight, Callum Whitaker's two worlds were going to collide, and Ayanna was going to make sure everyone remembered her name. By the time Callum pulled into their driveway, his hands were shaking. He sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady his breathing. The townhouse glowed warmly from within. He could see Ayanna moving past the window, a flash of green. This was it. No more excuses. No more delays. He was taking his wife to the gala. Callum stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. Before he could reach for his keys, the door opened. Ayanna stood there, breathtaking in her gown, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. You look." Callum's voice failed him. He swallowed hard and tried again. "You look incredible." "Thank you," Ayanna said softly. She stepped forward, closing the door behind her. "Ready?" "No," Callum thought. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready." But he nodded anyway. "Let's go." As they walked to the car, Ayanna slipped her hand into his. Her grip was firm, grounding. He squeezed back, hoping she couldn't feel how terrified he was. The drive to the Fairmont Atlanta was quiet. Soft jazz played on the radio. The city slid past them, alive and indifferent. Callum kept stealing glances at Ayanna, who stared calmly out the window, her face unreadable. "Are you nervous?" he asked finally. Ayanna turned to him, a small smile playing at her lips. "No," she said. "Are you?" Callum didn't answer, because the truth was, he wasn't just nervous. He was terrified. Nearly 4 years ago, Callum Whitaker had been a different man. Not fundamentally different, he still carried the same insecurities, the same fears. But they hadn't yet hardened into the walls he would later build around his heart. Back then, he was simply a driven, slightly lonely bachelor who worked too much and dreamed too little. The Urban Future Conference was held at the Georgia World Congress Center in late April. Callum had almost skipped it. His schedule was packed with site inspections and investor meetings, and he had convinced himself that sitting through 3 days of panels and presentations would be a waste of time. But his mentor at Monarch Development had insisted, arguing that networking was just as important as blueprints. So Callum went. On the second day, he found himself on a panel discussing affordable housing initiatives. He spoke competently about cost per unit metrics and zoning challenges, his presentation polished but passionless. When the panel ended, attendees filtered toward the exhibition hall where various organizations had set up booths showcasing urban development projects. That's where he saw her. Ayanna Linwood stood beside a modest display table, talking animatedly with a small group of visitors. Her booth was simple, just a folding table covered with photographs of transformed vacant lots, colorful murals painted on brick walls, and children laughing in newly built community gardens. A hand-painted banner read, Bloom Collective, art plus community plus hope. She wore jeans and a bright yellow blouse, her dark curls pulled back in a loose ponytail. When she laughed, and she laughed often, her whole face lit up. Galaℹ found himself drawn toward her booth, weaving through the crowd almost involuntarily. He stopped a few feet away, pretending to study one of the photographs while actually watching her. She was explaining her non-profit's mission to an older gentleman, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. "We don't just plant gardens," Ayanna was saying. "We teach young people to design them, build them, maintain them. It's not charity, it's empowerment. These kids learn carpentry, landscaping, project management. They create something beautiful in their own neighborhoods." The gentleman nodded appreciatively and moved on. For a brief moment, Ayanna was alone at her booth. She noticed Galaℹ staring and smiled. "Interested in community art projects?" she asked. Galaℹ cleared his throat, suddenly feeling like a teenager. I was just on the affordable housing panel. Your work looks really interesting." "The affordable housing panel?" Ayanna's eyes brightened. "I wanted to attend that one, but I've been stuck at this booth all morning. How did it go?" "Honestly." Galaℹ stepped closer. "Pretty dry. Lots of talk about funding models and regulatory frameworks. Nothing as inspiring as this." He gestured to her display. Ayanna laughed. "Oh, I doubt that. I'd love to hear about it. I mean, if you have time." "I have time," Galaℹ said immediately. Then, gathering courage, "Can I buy you a coffee? I promise to make affordable housing sound at least moderately interesting." She tilted her head, studying him with warm, intelligent eyes. "You know what? I'd like that." They found a small cafe just outside the convention center, one of those Atlanta spots with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Galaℹ bought 2 lattes and they settled into a corner booth. What was supposed to be a quick coffee break turned into 3 hours. They talked about everything. Galaℹ explained his vision for mixed-income housing developments that actually serve communities instead of displacing them. Ayanna shared stories about the teenagers she worked with, kids who discovered talents they never knew they had. The conversation flowed effortlessly, jumping from urban planning to favorite childhood cartoons to the best breakfast spots in Atlanta. At one point, Ayanna teased him for not recognizing a local hip-hop artist she mentioned. "You live in Atlanta, and you've never heard of him? That's almost criminal." "I'm musically sheltered," Galaℹ admitted with a grin. "My playlist is basically just NPR podcasts and whatever plays at the gym. That's tragic. I'm going to have to educate you. I'm a willing student." Ayanna laughed, and Galaℹ felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years, if ever. Before they parted ways that afternoon, they exchanged numbers. Galaℹ promised to send her information about a vacant lot near one of his upcoming projects. Ayanna promised to send him a proper Atlanta music playlist. By the time he got back to his car, Galaℹ was smiling so hard his cheeks hurt. Their courtship unfolded naturally over the following months. Text messages turned into phone calls. Phone calls turned into dinner dates. Dinner dates turned into long evening walks through Piedmont Park, where they would kick off their shoes and walk barefoot through the grass, talking until the park lights flickered on. Galaℹ had never met anyone like Ayanna. She was optimistic without being naive, passionate without being impractical. She challenged him in ways that made him better. When he got too caught up in spreadsheets and budget projections, she reminded him that buildings were meant for people, not profits. When she got discouraged by bureaucratic roadblocks, he helped her navigate the systems that could actually get things done. They complemented each other perfectly. Galaℹ handled budgets and blueprints. Ayanna brought warmth and creativity. He taught her about zoning laws. She taught him about color theory and community engagement. Together, they began planning a joint project, a community garden adjacent to his next. Housing development, designed and built by local youth through Bloom Collective. Their relationship wasn't just romantic, it was a partnership. They dreamed together, planned together, built something bigger than either of them could create alone. One Friday evening in October, 6 months after they had met, Galaℹ decided to surprise Ayanna with homemade soup. He wasn't much of a cook, but he had found a simple recipe online and convinced himself it would be romantic. Ayana arrived at his condo after work, tired but smiling. She wore a faded t-shirt that said, "Art saves lives," and comfortable jeans with paint stains on the knees. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She looked absolutely beautiful. "Something smells good," she said, kissing his cheek. "Don't get too excited," Galaℹ warned. "I'm flying blind here." They moved around the small kitchen together, Ayana chopping bread while Galaℹ stirred the pot. Jazz played softly from his phone on the counter. The evening light filtered through the window, golden and gentle. Galaℹ watched her as she worked, the way she hummed along to the music, the way she absent-mindedly tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. In that moment, wearing her paint-stained jeans and faded t-shirt, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And he realized, with absolute clarity, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. "Ayana," he said quietly. She looked up. Galaℹ set down the spoon, his heart racing. He had no ring, no plan, no prepared speech, just an overwhelming certainty. He dropped to one knee right there on the kitchen floor. Ayana's eyes widened. "Galaℹ, what are you?" "I love you," he said simply. "I love everything about you. I love how you see possibility where other people see problems. I love how you make me want to be better. I love that you laugh at my terrible jokes and that you're teaching me about music and that you believe in things I've forgotten how to believe in. I don't have a ring yet, and I'm probably doing this all wrong, but I don't want to wait another second to ask, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Ayana's cheeks. She nodded, then laughed, then nodded again. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." Galaℹ stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, he realized he had knocked over the spoon. Soup dripped slowly onto the floor. "Our first engaged moment," Ayana said, gesturing at the mess, "and you've already made me cry and spilled soup everywhere." "I'm an overachiever," Galaℹ said, and kissed her again. They married few months later in a small, intimate ceremony in Galaℹ's parents' back garden. It was nothing fancy, just close family and a handful of friends gathered under string lights as the sun set. Ayana wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers. Galaℹ wore a navy suit and couldn't stop smiling. Before the ceremony, Ayana's mother pulled her aside and fastened a delicate gold necklace around her neck. "This was my mother's," she said softly, "and now it's yours. Wear it and remember, love isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for." Ayana hugged her mother tightly, careful not to smudge her makeup. The ceremony itself was brief and heartfelt. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Galaℹ's father raised a glass of lemonade. He had been sober for 10 years, and offered a toast. "To Galaℹ and Ayana," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "May your love grow deeper with every passing year, and may you always remember why you chose each other." Everyone clinked their glasses. Ayana leaned into Galaℹ's side, her hand finding his. He squeezed back, thinking he had never been happier. Some of Galaℹ's extended family, the old money Atlanta relatives who summered in Charleston and belonged to exclusive country clubs, seemed mildly surprised by his choice of bride. A few raised eyebrows, a few polite but pointed questions about how you two met and what Ayana's people do. But Galaℹ, still floating on the joy of marrying the woman he loved, shrugged it all off. What did it matter what his great-aunt or second cousin thought? This was his life, his choice, his happiness. If only that confidence had lasted. The first months of marriage were blissful. Galaℹ and Ayana settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. Sunday mornings became sacred, their time to be lazy and playful and completely themselves. One particular Sunday, they decided to have a pancake cook-off. Ayana claimed she made the fluffiest pancakes in Georgia. Galaℹ insisted his were superior. The only way to settle it, they agreed, was a blind taste test. The kitchen quickly descended into chaos. Flour dusted every surface. Ayana accidentally used salt instead of sugar in her first batch and had to start over. Galaℹ, attempting to impress her with flambéed bananas, set off the smoke alarm. They both dissolved into laughter, waving dish towels at the ceiling while Frank Sinatra crooned from the speaker. When the smoke cleared, they stood in the middle of the disaster zone, covered in batter, grinning at each other like fools. "I think we both lost," Ayanna said. "Nah," Callum replied, pulling her close. "I'd say we both won." They danced slowly in the flower-covered kitchen, swaying to Sinatra, completely content. This was their private paradise. Within the walls of their home, they were perfectly balanced partners. Callum brought structure and stability. Ayanna brought joy and spontaneity. He helped her manage Bloom Collective's finances. She helped him remember why he had gotten into affordable housing in the first place. Together, they were stronger, happier, more whole. No complications, no shame, just love. But whenever the demands of Callum's career pulled him into social events, a shadow grew over their joy. Whenever his phone buzzed with an invitation to a work dinner or networking gala, something in him tensed. And whenever Ayanna asked to come along, something in him recoiled. At first it was subtle, easy to miss, easier to ignore. But shadows, when left unaddressed, have a way of growing. And the shadow that had begun to creep into Callum and Ayanna's marriage would soon threaten to consume everything they had built together. The pattern started innocently enough. A month after their honeymoon, Callum's firm hosted a dinner for potential investors. Ayanna had been excited when he mentioned it, already planning what she would wear. But when she asked what time they should leave, Callum had hesitated. "It's going to be pretty boring," he said. "Just a lot of financial talk. You'd probably hate it." "I don't mind," Ayanna replied. "I'd like to meet your colleagues." Callum kissed her forehead. "Next time, I promise. This one's really just business." She had accepted it. After all, not every work event needed a +1. But then there was the next dinner, and the networking reception after that, and the holiday party in December. Each time, Callum found a reason why Ayanna shouldn't come. Too boring, too formal, too last minute, too something. At first, Ayanna told herself it was fine. Callum worked hard, and these events were part of his job. She had her own work to focus on anyway. Bloom Collective was expanding, and she barely had time to breathe most weeks. But as the months turned into a year, and then 2, a question began forming in the back of her mind. Why didn't her husband want to be seen with her? The firm picnic happened in late June, during their 2nd year of marriage. It was a casual Saturday afternoon event at Chastain Park. Nothing fancy, just grilled food, lawn games, and families enjoying the summer weather. When Callum mentioned it over breakfast, Ayanna had immediately perked up. "A picnic? That sounds fun. I'll make my potato salad." Callum's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "You want to come?" "Of course I want to come," Ayanna said, confused by his tone. "It's a family event, isn't it?" "Well, yeah, but—" Callum set down his fork. "I just figured you'd be busy with your mural project." "I can take one Saturday off," Ayanna said gently. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'd really like to meet the people you work with, Callum. I feel like I don't know anything about that part of your life." Callum's jaw tightened, but he managed a smile. "Okay, sure. It starts at noon." That Saturday, Ayanna wore a cheerful coral sundress and sandals. She had spent the morning making her grandmother's famous potato salad, the one that always disappeared first at gatherings. She felt light and happy as they drove to the park, chatting about the beautiful weather and joking about Callum's chances in the inevitable softball game. But the moment they arrived, Callum's entire demeanor shifted. His shoulders stiffened. His smile became forced. When Ayanna reached for his hand as they walked toward the pavilion, he pretended to adjust his sunglasses, slipping out of her grasp. "There's my boss," Callum muttered. "Just let me do the talking, okay?" Before Ayanna could respond, a tall man in a polo shirt and khaki shorts approached, grinning broadly. "Callum. Glad you made it." Richard Grant extended his hand for a firm shake, then turned his attention to Ayanna. His eyes swept over her with polite curiosity. "And who's this? Your sister?" The question hung in the air. Ayanna waited for Callum to correct him, to say, "This is my wife." 3 simple words. Instead, Callum laughed, a tight, nervous sound. "Oh no, this is Ayanna. We've known each other since... well, we're childhood friends." Childhood friends. The lie landed like a slap. Ayanna's smile froze on her face. She forced herself to shake Richard's hand, to say something polite and forgettable. Richard made small talk for another minute, then excused himself to check on the grills. The moment he was gone, Callum grabbed Ayanna's elbow and steered her away from the main gathering toward a shaded area beneath a cluster of magnolia trees. "I'm sorry," he whispered urgently. It's complicated. I'll explain later." Ayanna pulled her arm free, her chest tight. "Complicated? Please, Ayanna. Not here." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she had never seen before. Shame. He was ashamed of her. "I think I should go," Ayanna said quietly. "You don't have to." "I think I should go," she repeated, her voice trembling now. She walked back to the car, leaving the potato salad on one of the picnic tables. Callum caught up with her in the parking lot, apologizing profusely, but she couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. That night, he held her while she cried. He promised it wouldn't happen again. He promised he would introduce her properly next time. He promised he was just protecting her from awkward questions, from uncomfortable scrutiny. Ayanna wanted to believe him, but the damage was done. Over the following months, Callum rationalized his behavior into something almost reasonable. He told himself he was protecting Ayanna from the subtle racism that still lingered in Atlanta's old money circles. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, the right event, the right context to introduce her properly. He told himself a lot of things. But the truth he couldn't quite face, was simpler and uglier. He was afraid. Afraid of the questions, afraid of the stares, afraid of being seen as different, as other, as someone who didn't quite fit the mold his colleagues expected. Callum had spent his entire career building a certain image. Competent, professional, unthreatening. He feared that showing up with Ayanna would complicate that image in ways he couldn't control. So he kept her hidden. And with each event he attended alone, the lie grew bigger, the secret heavier. Ayanna, for her part, tried to be understanding. She knew the world could be cruel. She knew that interracial couples still faced judgment, especially in certain circles. She told herself that Callum's hesitation came from a place of love, not shame. But every time he walked out the door without her, a small piece of her heart hardened. She stopped asking to come to events, stopped mentioning his work dinners. When friends asked about Callum's job, she changed the subject. It was easier than explaining why she had never met a single one of his colleagues. "Everything's fine," she would say with a practiced smile. "We're just both really busy." But everything wasn't fine. Each lie Callum told, each time he introduced her as a friend, or worse, pretended she didn't exist, bristled inside her like a thorn working its way deeper under the skin. The hurt was small at first, manageable, but it grew. The confrontation came on a cool autumn evening, nearly 3 years into their marriage. Ayanna had spent the day at a community center in West Atlanta, working with a group of teenagers on a mural project. She came home tired but fulfilled, her hands still stained with paint. The house smelled of the vanilla candles she loved, and soft lamplight filled the living room. She had lit incense earlier, sandalwood, Callum's favorite, hoping to create a peaceful atmosphere. She found him in the bedroom, lacing up his dress shoes. He wore slacks and a crisp button-down shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. "Corporate breakfast tomorrow," he explained when he saw her watching. "I need to get there early to set up." Ayanna leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed. She wore a silk-wrapped dress in deep burgundy, comfortable and elegant. For a long moment, she just watched him. "Callum," she said softly. "Hmm?" He didn't look up, focused on his shoes. "We said we were partners in everything, remember?" Something in her tone made him pause. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Of course, babe. We are." Ayanna walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Then why do I feel like we only keep the love part of that promise?" Callum's expression shifted, confusion, then defensiveness. "What do you mean?" You know what I mean. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Why won't you bring me with you? Why do you keep lying about me, about us? I don't, Callum started, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. It's not that simple, Ayanna. Then explain it to me. It's complicated. Work is complicated. I don't want to make things awkward. Awkward for who? Ayanna asked. For them or for you? Callum stood, pacing to the window. You don't understand the environment, the politics. People talk, people judge, so you hide me instead. I'm not hiding you. Yes, you are. Ayanna stood too, her voice rising slightly. You've been hiding me for 3 years, Callum. 3 years. I've never met your boss. I've never been to a single company event. Half your colleagues don't even know you're married. That's not fair. If you're ashamed of who I am, Ayanna said, her voice breaking now, that. Something you have to fix, not I. I won't keep pretending this is okay. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Callum's face crumpled. He crossed the room and reached for her hands. I'm not ashamed of you, Ayanna. I love you. You're the best thing in my life. Then why do I feel like you're secret? He didn't have an answer. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead the way he always did, when he didn't know what else to say. I'll do better, he whispered. I promise. Ayanna wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it hurt. That night, as they lay in bed, Ayanna stared at the ceiling while Callum held her from behind. She felt his body shake, heard his quiet sobs muffled against her hair. He was crying. Not for her, she realized, but for himself, for the coward he knew he had become. Ayanna lay awake long after his breathing evened out, imagining a different life. A life where they walked hand in hand through his office. A life where she was introduced as my wife with pride, instead of hidden like a mistake. She fell asleep to that fantasy, her pillow damp with silent tears. If this story is hitting home, take a moment to hit that like button. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we need to hear most. Drop a comment below. Have you ever felt hidden or ashamed in a relationship? Your story might help someone else heal. And make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting to the part that changes everything. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, the distance between them grew. Callum buried himself in work, spending longer hours at the office, volunteering for extra projects. It was easier than facing the disappointment in Ayanna's eyes, easier than confronting his own cowardice. Ayanna, meanwhile, poured her energy into Bloom Collective, and the non-profit responded beautifully. She landed a partnership with the city to convert 3 abandoned storefronts in Bankhead into rotating art galleries. She hired a small team of local designers and artists who shared her vision. Applications flooded in from young people wanting to participate in her programs. Then came the big one, a 6-figure deal with a private foundation to expand Bloom Collective's reach into 5 more Atlanta neighborhoods. Ayanna was building something extraordinary. The night she closed the deal, she came home at midnight, practically floating with excitement. Callum was still awake, working on his laptop at the kitchen table. She rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders from behind. I did it, she whispered. The foundation said yes. 6 figures, Callum. We're going to change so many lives. Callum turned in his chair and hugged her, but his embrace felt stiff, his congratulations hollow. That's great, babe. Really great. Aren't you excited? Of course I am. I'm proud of you. But even as he said it, he glanced back at his laptop. I'm sorry, I just really need to finish these emails before tomorrow. Ayanna's smile faded. She stepped back, her arms falling to her sides. Right. Of course. She went to bed alone that night, her excitement curdling into something bitter. At Monarch Development, Callum's colleagues had started to notice his perpetual singleness. At 34, he was one of the few partners without a visible personal life. You seeing anyone, Callum? Brenda from marketing asked one day in the break room. Just married to the job, Callum deflected with a practiced grin. You should get out more, she teased. Show off a little. You're a catch. Callum laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. When asked about weekend plans, he invented solo hiking trips and friends visiting from out of town. When questioned about his living situation, he vaguely mentioned a place in Virginia, Highland, without specifying that it was a townhouse he shared with his wife. The lies became second nature, and each one carved another sliver out of the man he used to be. One crisp morning in December, Ayana's frustration finally boiled over, and what happened next would force both of them to face the truth they had been avoiding for far too long. December in Atlanta brought cool mornings and golden light that slanted through bare tree branches. 2 days before the charity gala, Callum came home early from the office, his mind already spinning with logistics for the event. Guest list, seating arrangements, his prepared remarks about the West Side housing project. He pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed Ayana in the backyard. She was kneeling in the flower bed that bordered their porch, her hands deep in the dark soil. She wore old jeans and one of his oversized sweatshirts, her hair tied back with a colorful scarf. Around her, flats of winter pansies waited to be planted, deep purples, bright yellows, cheerful whites. Callum stepped out of the car and walked around to the backyard gate. "What are you doing?" Ayana looked up, her face bright with genuine happiness. Dirt smudged her cheek. "Planting flowers. I wanted the house to look nice." "It's December," Callum said, stating the obvious. "I know. These are winter flowers, pansies and violas. They'll bloom even when it's cold." She gestured to the half-planted bed with pride. "Our anniversary is next week, remember? I thought it would be nice to have some color, make things beautiful. For us, their anniversary. 3 years." Callum had completely forgotten. He should have smiled, should have thanked her, should have grabbed a trowel and joined her in the dirt, laughing and planting side by side the way they used to do everything. Instead, he frowned. "You've got dirt everywhere," he said, his tone clipped. Ayana's smile faltered. "What? Look at you. Look at the porch." He gestured to the scattered soil, the gardening tools, the flats of flowers. "Are you sure you should be doing this? We've got the gala in 2 days. I know. That's why I'm doing it now. I'll clean everything up, I promise." Callum glanced back toward the house, then at the neighbors' pristine yards on either side. His jaw tightened. "We have a landscaper for this kind of thing, Ayana. I like gardening. You know that He stopped, rubbed his temple. When he spoke again, his voice was low and sharp. "I don't want to come home and tell my investors that my yard is a mess because my wife was playing in the dirt all day." The words landed like stones. Ayana's hands stilled in the soil. She stared at him, processing what he had just said. The casual cruelty of it. The implication that her presence, her joy, her effort to make their home beautiful was an embarrassment. Silence stretched between them. A bird called from somewhere nearby. A car passed on the street. The world kept moving, indifferent to the small heartbreak happening in a backyard in Virginia Highland. "Right," Ayana said finally. Her voice was quiet, empty of emotion. "You're right. I'm sorry. Ayana, I didn't mean—" "No, you're absolutely right." She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "I'll let the landscaper handle it next time. Wouldn't want to embarrass you." "That's not what I said, isn't it?" Callum opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to take back words that were already out there, already cutting into her. Ayana picked up her gardening gloves and walked past him toward the house. She didn't look at him, didn't cry, just walked inside and closed the door quietly behind her. Callum stood alone in the backyard, surrounded by half-planted flowers, and realized he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. That night, they moved around each other like strangers, polite, distant. Callum tried to apologize over dinner, but Ayana simply nodded and said it was fine. But it wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Ayana excused herself early, claiming she had work to finish. She locked herself in the small office they had converted from a spare bedroom and opened her laptop. For a long time, she just sat there, staring at the screen, her hands shaking. Then she opened her email and began typing. Dear Evelyn, thank you again for the invitation to attend the gala this Friday. I know this is last minute, but I wanted to ask if there might be an opportunity for me to say a few words about the connection between affordable housing and community development. Ayanna paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What she was about to do felt both terrifying and necessary. She wasn't trying to hurt Galaℹ. She wasn't trying to get revenge. She was trying to save herself. Because she had finally understood something crucial. Galaℹ's shame wasn't about her. It was about him. And no amount of hiding, no amount of making herself smaller or quieter or more convenient, would fix what was broken inside him. She could love him. She did love him. But she also loved herself, and she was done being a secret. Ayanna finished the email and hit send before she could second-guess herself. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Galaℹ, oblivious to what was coming, focused on work. He rehearsed his remarks for the gala. He coordinated with Richard Grant about which donors to prioritize. He had his tuxedo dry cleaned and his shoes polished. He convinced himself that everything with Ayanna would blow over. It always did. They would go to the gala together, finally, after 3 years, and things would get better. He would introduce her properly. People would love her. And maybe, just maybe, the weight he had been carrying would finally lift. Meanwhile, Ayanna worked behind the scenes with quiet determination. Evelyn Harris, the gala coordinator, responded to her email within hours. Ayanna, what a wonderful idea. We'd be honored to have you speak. Can you keep it to about 5 minutes? I'll slot you in after the main program. Ayanna wrote her speech in one sitting. 5 minutes to say what she needed to say. 5 minutes to reclaim her voice. She also made a phone call to Bloom Collective's board of directors. I want to make a donation to the housing fund, she told them. $25,000. From the company. It's the right thing to do. Her CFO hesitated. Ayanna, that's a significant amount. Are you sure? I'm sure. Next, she went shopping. She found the emerald gown at a boutique in Buckhead. Elegant, striking, impossible to ignore. When she tried it on, the sales associate actually gasped. You look like royalty. Ayanna studied her reflection. The woman staring back looked strong, powerful, unashamed. I'll take it, she said. The morning of the gala, Ayanna woke before dawn. She lay in bed listening to Galaℹ's steady breathing beside her, his arm draped across her waist the way it always was. In sleep, he looked peaceful, young, like the man who had proposed to her over spilled soup in a tiny kitchen. She still loved that man, but she couldn't keep waiting for him to reappear. Ayanna slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him. She made coffee, watched the sun rise through the kitchen window, thought about what the night ahead would bring. She wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier, cleaner. Instead, she felt a deep, steady resolve. Tonight, she would step into Galaℹ's world, not as a secret or a shame, but as exactly who she was. Successful, brilliant, worthy of being celebrated, and whatever happened after that would be up to him. By late afternoon, Galaℹ was in his office, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. His heart hammered against his ribs. The familiar dread had settled in his stomach. He checked his phone. A text from Ayanna, almost ready. Should I meet you there, or do you want to pick me up? He stared at the message. This was it. The moment he had been avoiding for 3 years. Taking his wife, his brilliant, beautiful black wife, to a room full of his colleagues and investors. His hands shook as he typed, I'll pick you up, leaving soon. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Okay, I'll be waiting. Galaℹ closed his eyes. He could do this. He had to do this. Across town, Ayanna stood in front of her bedroom mirror, fastening the gold necklace her mother had given her. The emerald gown fit perfectly. Her makeup was flawless. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked like someone worth being proud of. Because she was. Ayanna took one last deep breath, grabbed her clutch, and headed downstairs to wait for her husband. Tonight would be different. On her terms. As the evening grew near and the city lights began to twinkle, Galaℹ and Ayanna prepared for a night that would redefine their marriage forever. He drove through the streets of Atlanta with his heart in his throat, terrified of what the night would bring. She sat beside him in silence, her hand steady in her lap, knowing exactly what she was about to do. The Fairmont Atlanta rose ahead of them, all glass and light and promise. Neither of them spoke. The car pulled up to the entrance, and everything changed. The Fairmont Atlanta's grand ballroom was a masterpiece of elegance. White and gold fabric draped from the ceiling in soft cascades, catching the light. From massive crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks overhead. Round tables dressed in cream linens filled the space, each set with fine china and gleaming silverware. Framed posters on mahogany easels displayed architectural renderings of future housing projects, blueprints for hope, rendered in clean lines and careful detail. Prominent donors mingled in clusters, champagne flutes in hand. City council members chatted with real estate developers. A state senator laughed at someone's joke near the bar. This was Atlanta's philanthropic elite, the people who wrote checks that changed lives, who moved money and made policy. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Callum Whitaker stood backstage near the service entrance, adjusting his cufflinks for the third time in as many minutes. His tuxedo was impeccable, tailored perfectly, not a thread out of place. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Outwardly, he looked every bit the successful developer, the rising star, the man who belonged here. Inwardly, he was falling apart. Richard Grant had found him 10 minutes earlier, clapping him on the shoulder with genuine warmth. Good job landing those big donors, Callum. Senator Michaels is very impressed with the West Side proposal. Thank you, sir, Callum had managed. Richard's eyes had flickered with something. Curiosity, perhaps. A question forming. But before he could ask it, someone else had called his name, and he'd moved on with a final nod. Callum knew what that unspoken question was. And your wife? He took a steadying breath and checked his watch. Ayanna would be here any minute. When she walked through the entrance, Callum forgot how to breathe. The emerald gown hugged every curve of her body, the rich fabric catching the light with each step. Her hair fell in soft, perfect waves around her shoulders. Her makeup was subtle but striking, emphasizing her warm brown eyes, her high cheekbones, the fullness of her lips. She wore the gold necklace her mother had given her, and it glinted at her throat. She looked like royalty. Callum nearly tripped over his own feet, moving toward her. You look... His voice failed. He swallowed and tried again. You look beautiful. Ayanna's smile was gentle but unreadable. Thank you. This dress is something special. I bought it for tonight. There was weight in those words that Callum couldn't quite interpret. He forced a smile, his heart hammering. Well, you're going to be the most stunning woman in the room. That's kind of you to say. He offered his arm. She took it. Her hand was steady. His was trembling. Together, they walked toward the ballroom entrance. The moment they stepped through the doors, a hush rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. Eyes found them, lingered, widened. Callum felt heat flood his face. For 3 years he had walked into these events alone. For 3 years people had seen him as the eligible bachelor, the hard-working developer with no attachments. Now, without warning, without context, he appeared with a woman on his arm, a beautiful, confident black woman who seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Who's that with Callum? Someone murmured nearby. A couple at the nearest table, colleagues from a partnering firm, gasped softly in surprise. All eyes were on them, on her. Callum's throat went dry. He wanted to run, wanted to disappear. Instead, he tightened his grip on Ayanna's hand and kept walking. A woman in a silver gown approached, her smile bright but confused. Callum, I didn't know you were bringing a guest. This is Ayanna, Callum said. His voice cracked slightly, betraying him. My wife. The word landed like a small explosion. The woman's eyebrows shot up. Your wife? I had no idea you were married. We keep things private, Callum stammered. Ayanna extended her hand with a gracious smile. It's lovely to meet you. The woman shook it, still visibly shocked, then excused herself to rejoin her table. Callum could already see her whispering urgently to her companions. Ayanna leaned close to Callum's ear. "Breathe," she whispered. "You look like you're about to faint." "I'm fine," he lied. Richard Grant appeared through the crowd, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes sharp with curiosity. He looked Ayanna up and down, not lewdly, but assessingly, like he was recalibrating everything he thought he knew about Callum. "Richard, this is Ayanna," Callum said quickly. "My wife." "Ayanna, this is Richard Grant, my boss." Richard's smile was stiff but polite. "Pleased to meet you, Ayanna. Callum speaks highly of you." It was a lie. Callum had never mentioned her, and they all knew it. Ayanna shook his hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine. I've heard wonderful things about the work Monarch Development does." "We try," Richard said. His associate, a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses, leaned over and muttered something that sounded like surprising development. Richard shot him a look, then turned back to them with a practiced smile. "Enjoy the evening." As they walked away, Callum felt like he was navigating a minefield. Every step, every introduction, every polite smile felt like it could detonate at any second. He kept his back straight and his expression pleasant, silently praying that nothing embarrassing would happen. Ayanna, by contrast, moved through the room with effortless grace. She smiled. She shook hands. She made small talk as if she'd attended 100 events like this. She belonged here. Callum was the one who didn't. The evening's program began shortly after. A local news anchor took the podium and welcomed everyone with practiced charm. A pastor offered a blessing over the meal. Then the mingling resumed as waitstaff began serving the first course. Callum spotted Edgar Penn near the bar and felt a small surge of relief. Edgar was friendly, easygoing, someone who might make this night a little less excruciating. Edgar noticed them and waved, a grin spreading across his face. "Callum." Edgar approached with a drink in hand. His eyes flickered to Ayanna, and his grin widened. "Man, I had no idea. You never told me you were married." His tone was half joking, half accusing. Callum's smile felt brittle. "Yeah, well, things happened." Edgar laughed, though it sounded a bit uncertain. "Things happened. That's all you're giving me." He turned to Ayanna, extending his hand. "I'm Edgar. Clearly, I don't know Callum as well as I thought I did. She's a stunner, by the way." Ayanna took his hand with a warm, firm grip. "Ayanna Linwood. And thank you, but I'm also a human being with opinions and accomplishments, not just arm candy." Edgar blinked, then laughed genuinely. "Touché. I deserved that." "What do you do, Ayanna?" "I run a non-profit called Bloom Collective. We turn neglected urban spaces into community art hubs." "No kidding." "That's incredible." Edgar seemed genuinely impressed. He leaned closer to Callum and stage whispered, "You've been holding out on us, man." Callum managed a weak laugh and clapped Edgar on the shoulder. "Easy there, buddy." Edgar ordered them drinks, chatted for a few more minutes, then excused himself. As he walked away, Ayanna turned to Callum. "That was friendly," she said quietly. Callum forced another laugh, but inside, shame burned hot and corrosive. Edgar's surprise, the shock on people's faces, the whispered conversations, it all confirmed what Callum had feared. He had hidden her so thoroughly that her sudden appearance was causing ripples. And those ripples were about to become a tidal wave. Dinner began in earnest. A 3-course meal was served while a string quartet played soft classical music. Champagne was poured. Callum sat rigidly beside Ayanna, barely tasting his food. His stomach was tied in knots. Ayanna leaned over and whispered, "Everything all right?" Callum turned to her, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. For a moment, the weight of everything, the lies, the hiding, the shame, threatened to crush him. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. Before he could answer, Evelyn Harris took the stage. Evelyn was a gracious woman in her 60s, beloved in Atlanta's philanthropic circles. She tapped the microphone gently, and the room quieted. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Evelyn said, her voice clear and joyful. "Tonight, we celebrate not just new housing units, but the spirit of community that makes them possible. Polite applause rippled through the room. This year, Evelyn continued, we also have the privilege of hearing from someone who truly embodies that spirit. Many of you may not know her yet, but you will after tonight. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Miss Ayanna Linwood. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Callum's heart lurched violently in his chest. His head whipped toward Ayanna, eyes wide with shock. She was speaking tonight? And she hadn't told him? Ayanna stood smoothly, her expression calm and confident. She adjusted her gown, took a breath, and walked toward the stage. Every eye in the room followed her. Callum sat frozen, his mind reeling. What was happening? How had she arranged this? Why hadn't she said anything? Under the warm glow of the chandeliers, Ayanna took the microphone from Evelyn. She looked radiant, poised, powerful. Thank you, Evelyn, for that kind introduction, Ayanna began, her voice steady and warm. I'm honored to be here tonight. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd. When her eyes found Callum, she held them for just a moment, long enough for him to see both her strength and her sadness. My husband often tells me about the wonderful work supported here, she continued. Murmurs rippled through the audience. People turned to look at Callum, confusion and surprise on their faces. And I'm humbled to stand before you, because this cause is very close to my heart. Callum felt like he was drowning. Everyone was staring, truly staring, and he had nowhere to hide. Ayanna's voice grew more passionate. 5 years ago, I founded Bloom Collective, a non-profit that transforms neglected urban spaces into vibrant community art hubs. We don't just beautify neighborhoods, we empower young people to dream, to build, to create. We teach them that they matter, that their communities matter. The room was completely silent now, captivated. None of that work would be possible without partners like Callum's firm, Ayanna said, looking directly at him again. Her eyes glistened. And people like many of you in this room. I see my vision realized in every brick laid for affordable homes, in every family that finds stability and hope. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried both strength and vulnerability. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Bloom Collective is donating $25,000 to the Housing Fund. The room erupted. Applause thundered through the ballroom. People rose to their feet, raising their glasses. At the next table, Edgar turned to his colleague, eyes wide. Did you hear that? 25 grand. Richard Grant set down his wine glass slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to something like respect. Callum sat motionless, his mouth hanging open. $25,000. Ayanna's company, the non-profit she had built from nothing, was donating a fortune. And she had done it all without telling him. Embarrassment, shame, and pride crashed over him in waves. He felt like he was watching his world shatter and rebuild itself in the same moment. Ayanna finished her speech with grace, thanking the organizers and the attendees. The applause was deafening. She stepped down from the podium, moving through a sea of congratulations. An older woman at the neighboring table stood and announced loudly, I don't think I've ever been so surprised. Callum, your wife just made us all look like amateurs. There was laughter, joyful, not mocking. People shook Ayanna's hand, patted Callum's shoulder. The shock had turned into admiration. When Ayanna finally returned to their table, she reached for Callum's hand and squeezed it gently. Her eyes held his. Hurt and forgiveness mingled together. He wanted to speak, but words failed him. So he simply held her hand and let the tears he'd been fighting finally fall. Later, after the speeches and the meal, Callum pulled Ayanna aside to a quiet corner near the terrace doors. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice hoarse. Ayanna studied him for a long moment. I thought you should meet these people on my own terms, she said softly. I wanted them to see the real me. Not the version you've been too afraid to show them. Ayanna, what's more real, Callum? Her voice was gentle but firm. You hiding me, or me standing here proud next to the man I love? The question hung between them, impossible to ignore. Callum felt something break open inside him, something that had been locked tight for too long. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The band began playing a gentle waltz. Without a word, Callum took Ayana's hand and led her to the dance floor. He pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. They swayed together, the world around them fading into soft light and music. Ayana's laughter mixed with tears. "You look like you could cry, you know." Callum nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. For the first time in 3 years, he let go of the fear, the shame, the desperate need to control how others saw him. He held his wife in front of everyone and finally felt proud. If Ayana's courage just gave you chills, smash that like button right now. Her story is a reminder that we teach people how to treat us. Comment below, what would you have done in Ayana's position? Sometimes love means refusing to be diminished. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Stories like this don't come around every day, and this channel is dedicated to bringing you narratives that don't just entertain, they transform. But the real transformation was yet to come, in the quiet moments after the spotlight faded, when Callum and Ayana would finally face the truth of who they were and who they needed to become. The drive home was quiet. Soft jazz played on the radio, the same station they had listened to on their first date years ago. The city slid past the windows, downtown lights giving way to tree-lined streets, the familiar route to Virginia Highland that they had driven 1,000 times before. But tonight felt different. The air inside the car smelled faintly of roses from the floral arrangements. Ayana had brushed past on her way out of the ballroom. Callum kept stealing glances at her, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. She sat beside him, still breathtaking in her emerald gown, her hand resting calmly on his thigh. She looked content, tired, but genuinely happy. Callum couldn't find words. Every time he opened his mouth to speak, shame closed his throat. What could he possibly say that would be enough? How could he explain 3 years of cowardice in a 10-minute car ride? So he said nothing, and Ayana, sensing he needed the silence, didn't press him. When they arrived home, Callum helped her out of the car and unlocked the front door. The house welcomed them with familiar warmth, the vanilla candles Ayana loved, still burning low on the mantel, the soft glow of the lamp they always left on. They stood in the living room, still dressed in their gala finery, the weight of the evening settling around them like snow. Callum turned to Ayana, and something in him cracked wide open. Without a word, he crossed the space between them and lifted her into his arms. Not romantically, not passionately, just desperately, like a drowning man grabbing hold of something solid. Ayana wrapped her arms around his neck and melted into his chest. She felt him trembling. "Did I do okay?" she whispered against his shoulder. Her voice was small, tired but proud. Callum's tears came then, hot and unstoppable. "You did better than okay," he choked out. "You were amazing." He held her like that for a long time, his face buried in her hair, her heart beating steady against his chest. When he finally set her down, he took both of her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ayana." The words were raw, honest, stripped of every defense he had ever used. "I was ashamed," he continued, his voice breaking. "Not of you, not of how wonderful you are, how brilliant and kind and extraordinary you are. I was ashamed of myself, of what people might think, of how they might look at me differently once they knew." Tears streamed down his face now, unchecked. "I was scared," he admitted, "scared of their judgment, their questions, their opinions. And I let that fear turn me into someone I hate. I let it turn me into a coward." Ayana's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. She let him speak. "Watching you tonight." Callum shook his head, a broken laugh escaping. "Watching you stand up there, so confident and powerful and beautiful, I realized what an idiot I've been. You didn't need me to protect you. You never did. I was the problem, Ayana, not you. You didn't deserve to be hidden. You deserve to be celebrated." His voice cracked completely on the last word, and he bowed his head, shoulders shaking with sobs. Ayana reached up and brushed a tear from his cheek with her thumb. Her touch was gentle, forgiving. "Callum," she said softly, "I love you. I love us." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "But I need a partner who can stand with me through everything," she continued. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tremor of emotion underneath. "Not someone who's frightened of what other people think. Not someone who keeps me in the shadows." She took a shaky breath. "Tonight, though, tonight you stood up for me in a way I never expected. You introduced me as your wife. You danced with me in front of everyone. You finally let me shine." Callum nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "And I saw something in you tonight that I've been waiting 3 years to see," Ayana whispered. "Pride, not shame. Pride." "I know," Callum managed. "I know, and I promise I'm done being ashamed. I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "The only person I'm sorry for is you," he said hoarsely, "because I love you, and I made you feel anything less than proud of who we are together, and I will spend the rest of my life making that up to you." He kissed her then, slow and meaningful, pouring 3 years of apology and love and gratitude into it. She kissed him back, her hands cupping his face, her tears mixing with his. When they finally pulled apart, they were both crying and smiling at the same time. They moved to the couch, still in their gala clothes, closer than they had been in months. Ayana reached into her clutch and pulled out a small jewelry box. "I have something for you," she said. Callum watched as she opened the box. Inside was the gold necklace her mother had given her on their wedding day, the one she wore every day, the one she never took off. It had been polished until it gleamed. "Ayana, I can't—" "Shh." She smiled and leaned forward, fastening it around his neck. The delicate chain looked almost invisible against his collar, but he could feel its weight. "What's this?" he asked, touching it carefully. "It's for you," Ayana said simply. "Now you carry a piece of us with you too, a reminder that I'm with you, always, proudly, no matter where you go or who you're with." Callum's eyes softened. His fingers traced the chain, feeling its warmth. "Together," he whispered. Ayana smiled. Together. Later that night, they lay entwined in bed, the moonlight filtering through the blinds and casting silver stripes across their skin. Callum whispered apologies until his voice went hoarse, his arms wrapped tightly around Ayana as if he were afraid she might disappear. Ayana held him, her fingers tracing slow, gentle patterns across his chest. She didn't need more words. She could feel his remorse, his love, his promise in every breath. Callum made a silent vow to himself. He would never hide her again, never diminish her, never let fear dictate how he loved the woman who had saved him from his own cowardice. They made love that night, not wild or urgent, but quiet and tender, affirming, safe. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss was an apology accepted. Every whispered "I love you" was a rebuilding. When they finally stilled, wrapped in each other's arms, Ayana rested, her head on Callum's chest, and listened to his heartbeat slow. "This is how it always should have been," he murmured into her hair. "Yes," she agreed, "but we're here now. That's what matters." Callum kissed the top of her head and closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, he felt whole. For the first time in 3 years, they both felt free. And as the first light of morning crept through their window, painting the room in soft gold, Callum and Ayana slept peacefully in each other's arms, no longer burdened by secrets, no longer divided by shame. Just 2 people who loved each other, finally brave enough to show that love to the world. 7 years later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Whitaker home, now a larger house in the Inman Park neighborhood, one with a proper backyard, a garden that Ayana tended lovingly, and enough space for the laughter that filled every corner. Callum stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while their daughter, 5-year-old Zara, sat at the kitchen island with her coloring books spread everywhere. She had inherited Ayana's warm brown eyes and Callum's dimpled smile, along with an independent streak that kept both parents on their toes. "Daddy, you're burning them again," Zara announced without looking up from her drawing. Callum glanced down at the pan and laughed. "You're right, sweetheart. Good catch." In the living room, their 2-year-old son, Malcolm, toddled around in his pajamas, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. He had Callum's sandy hair and Ayana's infectious laugh, a combination that melted hearts everywhere they went. Ayana emerged from the bedroom, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf, wearing one of Callum's old college t-shirts. Even after 10 years of marriage and 2 children, Callum still felt his breath catch when he saw her. She looked beautiful in the morning light, tired but radiantly happy. "Coffee?" he offered, already pouring her a cup. "You're a lifesaver," she said, kissing his cheek. She scooped Malcolm into her arms, blowing raspberries on his neck until he squealed with delight. This was their Sunday morning ritual, chaotic, loud, imperfect, and absolutely everything Callum had never known he wanted. 7 years had passed since that fateful gala night. 7 years of growth, healing, and deliberate transformation. The change hadn't happened overnight. After Ayana's speech, Callum had to face the consequences of his years of hiding. There were uncomfortable conversations with colleagues who felt deceived. There were family members who asked pointed questions. There were moments when old fears tried to creep back in, whispering that it would be easier to retreat into the shadows. But Callum fought those voices. He began therapy 6 months after the gala, working through the internalized shame he had carried since childhood. He learned that his fear wasn't really about Ayana at all. It was about his own desperate need for approval. His terror of being seen as different or less than in the eyes of people who didn't actually matter. Slowly, painfully, he learned to let that go. And Ayana had been patient, not permissive. She held him accountable when he slipped into old patterns, but patient. She reminded him that transformation is a journey, not a destination. Now, 7 years later, Callum was a different man. He kept a photograph on his desk at work, Ayana, Zara, and Malcolm at the park, all 3 of them laughing at something off camera. When colleagues asked about his weekend, he talked enthusiastically about his wife's latest project or his daughter's soccer games. When the firm hosted events, Ayana was always at his side, and he introduced her with unmistakable pride. "This is my wife, Ayana Linwood Whitaker. She's the founder and CEO of Bloom Collective. No hesitation, no shame, just love." Bloom Collective had grown exponentially. What started as a small non-profit had become a nationally recognized organization. Ayana had been featured in Forbes, interviewed on NPR, and invited to speak at conferences across the country. She had hired a staff of 40, opened offices in 3 cities, and transformed hundreds of neglected spaces into thriving community hubs. But she always came home. Success mattered to her, but not more than Sunday morning pancakes with her family, not more than reading bedtime stories to Zara and Malcolm, not more than the life she and Callum had built together. Callum had flourished too. He had eventually left Monarch Development to start his own firm, Whitaker and Associates, specializing in affordable, sustainable housing. His first project had been developed in partnership with Bloom Collective, combining housing with community art spaces. It was the work he had always wanted to do, but had been too afraid to pursue. Ayana had given him the courage to dream bigger. "Mommy, can we go to the park today?" Zara asked, finally looking up from her coloring. "Maybe after lunch," Ayana said. "Daddy and I have to get ready for the foundation dinner tonight." Zara wrinkled her nose. "Another fancy party?" Callum laughed. "Afraid so, kiddo. But Grandma's coming to stay with you, and I heard something about ice cream being involved." Zara's eyes lit up. "Deal." Malcolm, not fully understanding but excited by his sister's enthusiasm, clapped his chubby hands together. "Ice cream!" Ayana caught Callum's eye across the kitchen, and they shared a smile. These were the moments that mattered, not the galas or the accolades, but the ordinary magic of family. That evening, Callum stood in their bedroom, adjusting his tie in the mirror. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, and around his neck, barely visible beneath his collar, was the delicate gold necklace Ayana had given him 7 years ago. He wore it every day now, a constant reminder of the promise he had made. Together, always. Ayana emerged from the bathroom in a deep blue gown, elegant and striking. Her hair was styled in natural curls that framed her face. She looked regal. "You look incredible," Callum said softly. "You don't look so bad yourself," she replied, adjusting his tie with practiced ease. As they prepared to leave, Zara ran into the room and wrapped her arms around both of them. "You look like a prince and princess." Callum crouched down to her level. "You know what? Your mom is definitely a queen. The bravest, smartest, most beautiful queen I know." Ayana's eyes glistened with happy tears. "And what are you, Daddy?" Zara asked. "Me? I'm just the lucky guy who gets to stand beside her." The foundation dinner was held at the same Fairmont Atlanta, where everything had changed 7 years ago. As they walked into the grand ballroom, the same room where Ayana had reclaimed her voice, Callum felt a wave of emotion. But this time, there was no fear, no shame, no hesitation. He walked in with Ayana's hand firmly in his head held high. People greeted them warmly. "Callum, Ayana, so good to see you both." There were no shocked whispers, no uncomfortable questions, just genuine warmth from people who knew them as a team. Richard Grant, now retired but still attending major events, approached with a smile. "Callum, I heard about your latest project in Westside. Impressive work. And Ayana, congratulations on the national expansion. You two are changing the landscape of this city." "We're trying," Ayana said graciously. "How are the kids?" Richard asked. Callum beamed. "Zara just started kindergarten, and Malcolm is keeping us on our toes. They're amazing." Richard smiled. "I'm glad you brought them into the world. They're lucky to have you both." As Richard walked away, Callum squeezed Ayana's hand. 7 years ago, Richard hadn't even known she existed. Now, he was asking about their children. The transformation was complete. Later in the evening, Callum and Ayana stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet. The city spread out below them, twinkling and alive. "Do you ever think about that night?" Callum asked softly. 7 years ago, in this very building. Ayana leaned against the railing, thoughtful. "All the time. I was so afraid," Callum admitted, "so ashamed of myself. And you were so brave." "I didn't feel brave," Ayana said. "I felt heartbroken, but I knew I couldn't keep living that way. We couldn't keep living that way." Callum turned to face her, taking both her hands. "You saved us, Ayana. You saved me. By refusing to stay hidden, you forced me to confront the worst parts of myself. And I'm a better man because of it." "We saved each other," Ayana corrected gently. "I showed you the door, but you're the one who walked through it. You did the work, Callum. You changed because of you, because of our kids, because I finally understood that the only opinion that matters is the one I have of myself when I look in the mirror." Ayana smiled. "And what do you see now? A man who's proud of his life, a man who loves his wife and children more than anything, a man who's finally free." They kissed, slow and sweet, the city lights shimmering around them. When they returned home that night, they peeked into the children's rooms. Zara was fast asleep, her coloring books scattered across the bed. Malcolm was curled up with his stuffed elephant, his thumb in his mouth. Callum stood in the doorway of Malcolm's room, watching his son sleep, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. These children would grow up in a home where love was open and proud. They would never question whether their parents were ashamed of each other. They would see a partnership built on respect, honesty, and courage. They would learn that love isn't something to hide, it's something to celebrate. Ayana joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything we almost lost," Callum whispered, "and everything we gained. We're teaching them something important, you know," Ayana said. "We're teaching them that people can change, that mistakes don't define you, how you respond to them does." Callum nodded. "Zara already asks questions. About why some of her friends' parents don't look like each other, about why some people stare at us sometimes." "And what do you tell her?" "I tell her that love comes in all different forms, and that the people who stare don't matter. What matters is that we love each other and we're proud of our family." Ayana rested her head on his shoulder. She's lucky to have you as a father. We're all lucky, Galaℹ said. Lucky that you refused to let me waste our love on fear. They stood there together in the quiet hallway, watching their children sleep, grateful for the journey that had brought them here. The road hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles, but they had walked it together, hand in hand, refusing to hide. And now, they were finally home. Galaℹ's story teaches us that shame, especially shame rooted in fear of others' opinions, can poison even the purest love. A real partnership isn't just what happens behind closed doors. It's standing together in the light, proudly and without apology. Ayana showed us that loving someone doesn't mean erasing yourself. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be hidden. Self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. And Galaℹ proved that it's never too late to confront your demons and become the partner you promised to be. Whether it's shame about a relationship, a career, a dream, or any part of who you are, hiding yourself only creates distance from the life you deserve. The people who truly matter will celebrate you. And those who don't, they never mattered in the first place. If this story moved you, do me a favor. Hit that like button to help this message reach someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment sharing your biggest takeaway. I read every single one. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement to step into the light. And if you're not subscribed to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, subscribe right now. Every week, we bring you stories that don't just entertain, they transform. Remember, you are worthy of being celebrated, not hidden. Until next time, keep living your truth. This is Mr. Roman's Story Vault, where every story has a lesson worth keeping.